The Bible seems to be pro-war in some places. Chapter 1. Genocide in the Bible. The Old Testament has verses where war is justified. The Bible, especially the Old Testament, is contradictory about war. I found pro-war passages like the following two. Zechariah 10:5. Together they will be like warriors in battle, trampling their enemy into the mud of the streets. They will fight because the Lord is with them, and they will put the enemy horsemen to shame. Zechariah 14:2. I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it, the city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. People who believe every word in the Bible as divinely inspired say it's a case of righteous anger. When I read the book of Joshua, the sixth book of the Old Testament, I realized it's a war book about the exodus of the Jews from Egypt into the Promised Land, where they attacked and killed the people already there. That's when I realized this is not a book written by a divine loving God. When I was raised as a Catholic, pretty well all they taught was the New Testament, which is about loving God and loving your fellow man. As far as morals go, there is something wrong with what Christians call the Old Testament. The Jewish Torah is the first 5 books of the Christian Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In all my religion classes in Catholic school, they never taught us those ugly parts of the Bible where God is ordering the Jews to kill the other tribes. The rationale is that they are unruly pagans and heathens. Here is the main verse. Deuteronomy 20:16-18. 16 You are not to leave even one person alive in the cities of these nations that the Lord your God is about to give you as an inheritance. 17 You must completely destroy the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, just as the Lord your God commanded you. 18 So they won't teach you to do all the detestable things that they do for their gods. If you do what they teach you, you will sin against the Lord your God. Many scholars interpret the book of Joshua as genocide. The book of Joshua starts out with Moses dying while the Jews are spending 40 years wandering the desert so as to fulfill God's will that the previous generation all die out because they were prone to sin and false idols. Joshua takes over. God tells him to camp on the south side of the Jordan River in Joshua 3 in preparation to kill all the heathens. Joshua 3:10. Joshua continued, This is how you will know that the living God is among you and that he will certainly force the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites out of your way. They cross the river and start by destroying Jericho. Joshua 5:13-6:27. 13 Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, Are you for us or for our enemies? 14 Neither, he replied, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence, and asked him, What message does my Lord have for his servant? 15 The commander of the Lord's army replied, Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. 6 Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. 2 Then the Lord said to Joshua, See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March there around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. 4 Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. 5 When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout, then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in. 6 So Joshua son of Nun called the priests and said to them, Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it. 7 And he ordered the army, Advance. March around the city, with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord. 8 When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. 9. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding. 10. But Joshua had commanded the army, "Do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout." 11. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to camp and spent the night there. 12. Joshua got up early the next morning and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. 13. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. 14. So on the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. 15. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. 16. The 7th time around, when the priests sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout! For the Lord has given you the city." 17. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. 18. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. 19. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. 20. When the trumpets sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. 21. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep and donkeys. 22. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." 23. So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. 24. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. 25. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. 26. At that time Joshua pronounced this solemn oath, "Cursed before the Lord is the one who undertakes to rebuild this city, Jericho, at the cost of his firstborn son. He will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates." 27. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. When the Israelites arrive in the promised land, they are commanded to annihilate the Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites who already lived there, to avoid being tempted into idolatry. From the cities of these peoples which Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not let anything that breathes remain alive. You shall surely annihilate them just as Yahweh your God has commanded you, so that they may not teach you to do any of the abominations that they do for their gods, and you thus sin against Yahweh your God. Joshua carried out these commands. In Exodus 17, Amalek is introduced as a tribe that attacked the Israelites following their departure from Egypt. Moses defeats Amalek. In 1 Samuel 15:3, Israelite King Saul is told by God via the prophet Samuel, "Now go, attack Amalek, and proscribe, kill and dedicate to Yahweh all that belongs to him. Spare no one, but kill alike men and women, infants and sucklings, oxen and sheep, camels and asses." Saul's failure to be sufficiently harsh with Amalek is portrayed as leading to his downfall. David and Goliath is a brutal story at 1 Samuel 17:17. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Socoh in Judah. They pitched camp at Eph's Dammim, between Socoh and Azekah. 2 Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. 3 The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. For a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. A5 He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. B6 On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. 7 His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. C His shield bearer went ahead of him. 8 Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. 9 If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects, but if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." 10 Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." 11 On hearing the Philistine's words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. 12 Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. 13 Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war, the firstborn was Eliab, the second, Abinadab, and the third, Shammah. 14 David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, 15 But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. 16 For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. 17 Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. 18 Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them." 19 They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. 20 Early in the morning David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. 21 Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. 22 David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines and asked his brothers how they were. 23 As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. 24 Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. 25 Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." 26 David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" 27 They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." 28 When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is, you came down only to watch the battle." 29 Now what have I done, said David. Can't I even speak? 30 He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. 31 What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. 32 David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine, your servant will go and fight him." 33 Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him, you are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." 34 But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, 35 I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it and killed it. 36 Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. 37 The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you. 38 Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. 39 David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. 40 Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag and, with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. 41 Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield-bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. 42 He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. 43 He said to David, Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. 44 Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. 45 David said to the Philistine, You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. 46 This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. 47 All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. 48 As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. 49 Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. 50 So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand he struck down the Philistine and killed him. 51 David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. 52 Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath-Eph and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sha'araim road to Gath and Ekron. 53 When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. 54 David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem, he put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. 55 As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, Commander of the army, Abner, whose son is that young man? Abner replied, As surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know. 56 The king said, Find out whose son this young man is. 57 As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. 58 Whose son are you, young man? Saul asked him. David said, I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem. God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. 19 The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. To my lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we will spend the night in the square. 3 But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. 4 Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. 5 They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. 6 Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him. 7 And said, No, my friends. Don't do this wicked thing. 8 Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. 9 Get out of our way, they replied. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. 10 But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. 11 Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness so that they could not find the door. 12 The 2 men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here." 13 Because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. 14 So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, "Hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city." But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. 15 With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry! Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished." 16 When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. 17 As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away." 18 But Lot said to them, "No, my lords, be please. 19 Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains, this disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. 20 Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it, it is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." 21 He said to him, "Very well, I will grant this request too, I will not overthrow the town you speak of." 22 But flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it. That is why the town was called Zor. F. 23 By the time Lot reached Zor, the sun had risen over the land. 24 Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. 25 Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. 26 But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. 27 Early the next morning Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. 28 He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. 29 So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. See the article at en.wikipedia.org/wiki/genocide_in_the_Hebrew_Bible. The History Channel has a 90-minute video on YouTube called History Channel Bible Battles. There is a playlist called Bible Battles which has many videos entitled Battles BC.